I feel sort of badly because we invited 2 people to come from the West Coast and freeze this weekend. So Right, exactly. Yeah, so just, take Saul's perspective there. So Ann Balsamo is also joining us from the West Coast. She's currently professor of interactive media in the School of Cinematic Arts and professor of communications in the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Southern California. And I think it's interesting for those of us in the academia to see how people like Ken and Ann straddle units, and this is, again, speaks to that interdisciplinary and how do you function within a university setting that has departments and structures of knowledge that were started in the 19th century, and how could they ever anticipate what our needs are today. Ann is also the associate chair of the Interactive Media Division, and her talk today is from her forthcoming book, which will come out from Duke University Press, who published her previous book. And the title is Designing Culture, Working the Paradigm Shift. And please join me in welcoming Ann Balsamo.
I too want to say thanks to Ann and Jill for the invitation to present today. And then to Megan. I don't know what happened to her, but Megan, thank you for all the helpful emails and the hand-holding at a distance to get us here. I grew up in suburbs of Chicago, so the snow isn't so unfamiliar, but it has been, I was realizing, about 2.5 years since I last saw snow, and when I did, it was in Sweden up near the Arctic Circle, so it's kind of similar today. Arctic.
Cool and cool fusion.
It is the cool and cool fusion. I also want to I had to chuckle, because Ken, I actually have 2 earthquake kits. And it took me about 3 years, having moved from Atlanta to the Bay Area and then down to Southern California. And the reason I finally got one is because I realized that I spend all my professional life in heels, and I knew that if I was in my car and there was an earthquake, I wouldn't want to be walking home in heels. So the first thing I did was make sure I had sensible shoes at all points in my car so that if I have to abandon my car, I could at least get home. So my earthquake kit started with the appropriate shoes that one would wear during an earthquake.
Tell me the big thing you're supposed to have in there? A gun.
Oh, well, I actually think the shoes would be a lot further. I mean, shoes, water, and then I have, 2 earthquake outfits to wear. I mean, it's just, I don't think that's exactly what they meant by an earthquake. Okay, so what I'm going to do today in the time I have is do a little bit of contextualizing the presentation, talk a little bit about the book, which dips into a couple projects, or at least one project. Advertise an initiative that is not mine, but is one I'm participating in, that is a national initiative by the MacArthur Foundation. Talk a little bit about the paradigm shift that I think I've been involved with most of my academic career, and I'm now kind of pushing it ahead in various ways, and then ask the question, what's next? So the book is called Designing Culture, the Technological Imagination at Work. It is definitely a work of the digital humanities, interaction design, and it speculates about the kind of the nature of culture in an age of innovation. It picks up where my previous work left off. My first book was on the body and technology, specifically looking at the gendered implications of emergent biotechnologies during the 1980s, 1990s. So I work on this question, or this concept called the technological imagination, and develop it as a kind of rubric throughout the book. In the book, I reflect on some of the work I've done. I was an academic for my early kind of career. I worked at Georgia Tech in the School of Literature, Communication, and Culture. I left the academy and I left tenure to go into industry and to take up a position at Xerox PARC as a research scientist. And then, let's see, from there, oh yeah, I got laid off, which is not what you want to do when you have, a PhD and a mortgage in the Bay Area and so on, and did what then most people did in the dot-com bust was got together and thought, well, let's start a company. So I ended up starting a small company with some of my former colleagues from Xerox PARC. So then I spent 3 years being an entrepreneur trying to get other people to pay for my research in the form of clients and get them to pay for things like developing new cultural technologies and so on. And this is a kind of a chapter that meditates about how innovation happens between the lab and kind of contemporary culture and so on, and how it actually gets kind of performed and improvised into existence. The area of kind of design expertise that I kind of claim now as a kind of transformed humanist is in the area of public interactives, and part of the book really meditates on this category, this genre of public interactives, and its relationship to the development of technological literacies and the kind of reaffirmation of technological literacies that are already in existence. The final chapter of the book is a meditation, extended meditation on working the paradigm shift. As a working class subject, I actually pay attention to what is the labor involved in making this paradigm shift. I feel very belabored at times and beleaguered at times, but I think it's a shift that we definitely need to be kind of supporting and fomenting. And then finally, the last part of this book takes a look back at why write a book in a digital age. And so I meditate on what the book, the textual part of the book, can do that the rest of the project cannot do. So this is what I call a transmediated book. It will appear when it comes public in multiple forms. There's an interactive documentary that I did for the UN Conference on Women back in 1995. Then there's some new media journalism I participated in for the Atlanta Olympics in '96. There's a museum, an interactive museum exhibit that I'll talk a little bit about. There are several pieces of new media, new software that are being developed for the book that could never be kind of expressed in textual form. They really have to be experienced interactively. And so the whole book project called Designing Culture includes, CD, interactive multimedia things, new semantic kind of mapping software that create new kind of cultural analytics, some digital archives of projects that have long disappeared from the web. So there's kind of commentary about the relationship of what the text in the book can do versus what cultural work these other media forms do. So given that, let me talk just a little bit about an early project and kind of what some of the work I've been involved with that are now kind of providing insights that are accumulating as I move forward to a new phase of research. In 1998, when I left the academy, I went to Xerox PARC to join a group called RED, Research and Experimental Documents, and they were just getting ready, this group of RED, we're just getting ready to take on a big research project, a collaborative research project. There were 8 people in this group. I was specifically recruited to join the group as a humanist to bring a kind of techno-humanist perspective to a group that included engineers, architects, artists, sound designers, videographers, game designers. And the manager of the group, Rich Go, felt that one of the pieces that was missing was somebody who had a bit more of a kind of an explicit familiarity with cultural theory and so on. So that's kind of my role in the group, was to kind of bring that together. And what we understood that this group was doing was bringing together the kind of 4 creative disciplines of art, science, design, and engineering, with the humanities, and represented by myself, with the humanities being a kind of interlocutor among those domains. That one of the things that I, as a humanist, could offer as a kind of practical skill was the skill of translation and code switching, of learning the discourses and being familiar with the discourses. Having taught at Georgia Tech, I had only ever talked and taught engineers. So as a humanist, bringing kind of skills of translation where I could mediate in some respects between engineers and designers, where those are very sometimes strong divides, or artists and scientists. So the project that we took on was to showcase the innovation coming out of Xerox PARC. There was an invitation that was offered to PARC from the Tech Museum of Innovation. And what they wanted was the Tech Museum had just opened, and they were showcasing the innovation coming out of Silicon Valley. And they went to AT&T, they went to Interval Research, and then PARC got the third invitation to kind of do a site-specific installation of innovative research. And what the group decided to do was, instead of just plop down kind of examples of innovation kind of coming out of the various research labs at PARC, we decided that what we would do is take the innovative embryonic research, consider it a kind of an artistic medium, and turn that research into props to tell another story, or to re-narrativize the research in a story that wasn't kind of the dominant kind of narrative about Xerox PARC. And so what we ended up doing was saying that this was going to be an exhibition on the relationship of reading and new technologies, and that all of the things that we were going to put into this museum exhibit or this installation at the Tech was going to explore the relationship between the way in which reading will change in the future as our kind of new technologies of document production, of document display, of document interaction, how these things change. So XFR, as it was called, Experiments in the Future of Reading, included 18 new reading devices. There were about 15 of these were brand new reading devices. A couple of them were duplicates. And I'm not going to go into a kind of a laundry list of those. Usually that's what I do in my talks, is I kind of itemize those. Again, it was installed in the Tech Museum in 2000, was up for 6 months, and then it went on a national tour for a couple years. And now it's in crates in kind of in Menlo Park somewhere. So it was an interesting exercise, and as experiments are, there were some grand failures and there were some really interesting and surprising successes. And I'm going to talk about one of those successes that we hadn't anticipated. One of the pieces that I was involved with, again because I'm a humanist, my background is communications and philosophy of technology. One of the pieces I was involved with was called the Interactive Reading Wall. And this was an installation that consisted of 3 16-foot wall segments that kind of ran through the middle of the exhibition. And this was the exhibition that was, or the piece, the interactive in the whole installation, that was supposed to present the history of the development of reading, writing, and communication form. So that's a 26,000 to 30,000 year history. It went from pictograms to the Long Now Foundation. This is not a history that is simply authored. This was a history that I then had to author, and I had to author it in multiple ways, not only as a scholar of communication who knows that history or was at one point taught it and had to learn it again, but also had to kind of reiterate on how to tell the history in deep conversation with the development of a new medium, which was this thing called the interactive wall. So I'm going to show you just a brief video of the wall in action.
Process of creating an exhibit that would present our research to the general public. At the most basic level, this public was more demographically diverse than the typical audience for our research. From school-aged children, to their parents, to convention goers, to international tourists, and even to .com parties. But there were other design challenges evident in other pieces from XFR. Our first design challenge was this. We needed to explain to the visitor that reading had changed in the past, that new technologies alter reading, that reading alters technology, and that in the future, new forms of reading will emerge as new kinds of technologies present themselves to us.
I want to talk about a piece called The Reading Wall, which is actually a giant piece. It's three 16-foot long panels, and each panel has parts of episodes in the history of reading.
When we decided to do an exhibit on the future of reading, we thought it was also very important that we have an exhibit that covers the history of reading and the corollary, the history of writing and history of communication forms. How do you tell this history in a way that's engaging and interesting and fun for people of different ages and visitors of different ages? So we decided to do it as an interactive wall. Wall reading is a very public kind of reading experience. Traditionally, in historical classical ages, a group, a collective, a culture knew their history by reading what was on the walls.
Reading, actually, is very, very closely tied to technology. And the technologies that have changed over time and over place in the world are reflected in the ways people read. So what we've done is we've taken all of the changes in technology, changes in social situations, changes in cultural developments over the history of the world, and we've laid them out in a sort of a timeline of the history of reading. As I push the screen around on the wall, you can see that what happens is the text on the screen changes dynamically to illustrate various developments in reading. Here we're looking at pause and effect, which is an episode in the history of reading about punctuation. So as I push the screen to the left or to the right, we get more information about this particular thing, about punctuation. And I can read through it, and I can read these various paragraphs. It's all keyed on the location of the screen along this wall.
Okay, and the reason I wanted to show that is because it highlights some of the things that I think a humanist concerns themselves with when kind of developing new media. We took this project on not because we thought we were designing a new genre. At the time, all we were trying to do was think about what is a kind of culturally motivated form for presenting a history that belongs to all of us, none of us in particular, that could allow us to meditate and think about and problematize the kind of the project of doing history, where history is presented in a kind of static timeline in very kind of conventional ways, but how do you then tell the episodic kind of treatment of history? For example, how do you tell the story of the Rosetta Stone on a timeline when it is carved at one, literally for us, it would have been carved and been one dot on one panel. Its discovery would have showed up on a dot in a second panel, and its deciphering and its kind of implications would have showed up on kind of a dot on the third panel. How do you enable the story of the Rosetta Stone to become available in kind of the conventional context of a linear timeline? So among those kind of theoretical perspectives of kind of historiography and so on, those were the things that entered into the physical design of the piece. The piece was designed to be monumental, to do what the ancient walls did for a people, which is allow youth and young people into a culture to be brought to the wall and have their culture read back to them and have them encounter the wall as a point of kind of initiation into a kind of set of cultural understandings. The issues of information design, I go into great detail. How do you design for something with, where authoring becomes a matter of pixels and resolution and so on, and not about the right rhetorical flourishes. And then finally, a thing that I meditate on a lot in all of these projects are, what was the poetics of interactivity? This was a designed experience. The reading of this was a fully designed experience, and it was designed to enact a poetics of remembering and forgetting, which is the poetics of history. And so there was a way in which this piece was, and the design of it was constantly layered with questions that actually come pretty much straightforward out of kind of humanistic endeavors. Well, as it turns out, when we got laid off and had a chance to look for other clients, the clients that we engaged were actually really interested in this interactive digital wall form, and they ended up giving us the opportunity to iterate on the wall. So although we didn't start this as a project of designing a new media genre, in the end it is now what we would consider a new media genre. And in fact, there are a lot of interactive digital walls all over the world now, some of which we've built, but most of them we haven't. Right, we see them show up all over the place. So one of the first ones we did afterwards was for the Papalotti Children's Museum. This is a history of communication technologies. This was an opportunity for me to really meditate on what goes into writing the reading on the wall. I was working bilingually with designers who were in Mexico City. We were working kind of around the clock, and I was working in a language that I'm not proficient in. We had an opportunity as well to work with professional clients. This is for Sun Labs, to use the kind of historical affordances and the narrative affordances of the wall to tell a speculative story about a technology that doesn't yet exist, that the researchers were trying to get funding for. And so we could use the kind of, not only the tropes of science fiction, but the way in which the wall kind of makes history evident. You lead up with things that happen, and then at one point you shift to start narrating the years that are to come, as if the funding, as if the executives at Sun had seen the light and gave this research project funding and so on and so forth. And then one of the last pieces I did before I left Anami was to design a piece called Science for All Ages for the Singapore Science Center, in which I got to actually bring together several of my kind of previous interests, which is kind of scientific technological literacy, the issues about science, communicating science to the public, especially in the context of the Science Technology Center, and to kind of think about how do you narrate kind of that contentious and kind of very interesting history of science in a way that doesn't repeat received narratives about kind of great men, great ideas, or kind of great kind of technologies as the centerpieces. Things we learned in the process of building these new reading devices were observations about digital authoring, things that won't necessarily be kind of news to this audience, but these were the kinds of insights, thinking about the relationship of media and then new literacies, that I then brought with me when I went back into academia and I took on the position as director of the Institute for Multimedia Literacies. And so one of the things I did when I re-entered was to take some of the insights that we had gained ourselves about authoring these new devices and authoring for these devices and merge those insights with pedagogical efforts to teach or to create a program called Multimedia Across the Curriculum. And that was the program that I finished, that I developed about 3 years ago. It's now in its second year at USC. And it's it's focused on teaching kind of methods of digital authoring across the disciplines. So it's sort of like a writing across the curriculum program. It is not just based in the English department or in the interactive media department. It's delivered by a standalone institution. I think the kind of current version that we're starting to kind of look at with this is to expand it from multimedia across the curriculum to talk about creativity and design across the curriculum. Because very close on the heels of thinking differently about authoring in these new digital environments, you have to then start thinking about issues of kind of creative content production, and then, which of course comes into issues about design. So I'm seeing this program kind of in its next phase of development, which is as a kind of design and creativity across the curriculum. So these have been part of my kind of efforts to think seriously about this notion called the technological imagination, how it is developed, how it gets reinforced, how it gets kind of provoked and invoked, and then as I moved back into the academy, how does it get taught, how does it get trained, how does it get inspired? What I understand now is that the technological imagination involves learned habits of mind. We were having this discussion last night about, do I think it can be learned, or is it something innate? Is it like a good voice, or is it something that you are either born with or not, or is it something that can be kind of cultured in a way? And I kind of come down on the side that I think it can be cultured. This is a habit of mind that I root in Heidegger's kind of notion of the essence of technology is not the technological. It is rooted in what I would phrase as a non-essentialist philosophy of technology, or a non-object-based notion of technology. It understands the doubled logic of technology, that technologies are always the enabling conditions for things to be done differently, but they always also reproduce the conditions of the past, which means they are always determining as well as enabling. They will always have contradictory effects, and that this is a quality of mind that has to be able to think the contradictions of technology simultaneously. I believe it's always a matter of time travel, that this is an imagination that works with the past to hack the present to create the future. My greatest concern right now is the issues of the past and the future, both how to help us, how to stimulate imaginations to think and imagine a future we want to exhibit that doesn't simply see the past in a postmodernist way as a kind of pastiche of materials to be remixed and mashed up. Probably the most iconoclastic thing for me now is my polemics about the important role of tinkering, and I just have now decided that this is the direction of the next project, that this imagination is as much a matter of the hand as it is of the head, and I want to argue that that's a critical literacy for the 21st century. This work has kind of brought me to the MacArthur Foundation. I'm now part of their initiative on digital media and learning. You may not know kind of the guiding questions of this new initiative. It's been up and running for about 4 years, and it's getting ready to kind of be considered for renewal for the next 5 years. MacArthur, this project has 4 key questions, and they're funding research to explore these questions. How are young people changing through the interactions with digital media? How might learning environments change with the use of digital media? How do institutions need to change to support these new environments and these new learning practices? And then a kind of add-on MacArthur piece is what is required to create a new interdisciplinary field in digital media and learning, and a lot of their grant efforts are for that. I'm just going to make reference to this, some of their work on how young people are changing. Mimi Ito, Peter Lyman have done and just released a very impressive longitudinal ethnographic study of youth media. Mobile media use. Henry Jenkins has a white paper on 21st century literacies, kind of coming out of his analysis of participatory culture. Learning environments. Katie Salins at the Institute of Play has developed a kind of basic learning, I guess, game engine that they're going to build a kind of set of pedagogies around. Jim G's work in media literacy. And then Sasha Barar has an immersive learning game that is testing out some of these new insights. And then some of the work going on in how institutions need to change that's been supported by MacArthur is really interesting digital youth network, an after-school program in the south side of Chicago, a lab in New York, Colleen Macklin's for the use of digital media in nonprofit organizations. An organization I've been involved with a lot, Haystack. It's called the Humanities, Art, Science, Technology Advanced Collaboratory. It's a virtual organization for digital humanities centers, and our partners on the other sides of campus, our technology centers that are, and engineering programs that are interested in talking about more human-based questions. And then Katie Salins is also believe it or not, building a new public school in New York City called the Game School that will have an entire game pedagogy going through all the credentialing, all the kind of hoops and so on. Where I intersect with this is my grant is on the future of museums and libraries in a digital age, looking at the possibilities of mixed reality learning spaces and the role of tinkering as a mode of knowledge production. One of the insights that has come out of the MacArthur research is that we can no longer pinpoint the place where school or learning happens, that digital youth actually learn in their travels kind of through networks. And these networks, and this is my polemic, these networks are both digital and virtual, or simultaneously digital and material. And that it is a learning network where you can identify nodes, critical nodes in this distributed learning network, where what we need to understand is not only how they collaborate, because of course schools, after-school programs have collaborated for a long time and so on, but we need to start thinking about strategically about what are the learning affordances offered by each node, where we're not talking about things like just virtual museums that are available via websites that could be accessed in school programs. We're talking about what kind of learning can go on in the brick and mortar buildings of the museums, the community libraries, and so on. So it's not simply to create a virtual distributed learning network, but it's to start knitting these institutions into thinking themselves as a distributed network that both have virtual and material kind of environments. So in the sense of kind of participating in this grant and getting ready to kind of do some new work, I am consistently now kind of thinking about how do you bring new participants into these digital media learning experiences when you know that they're going to be coming in from different nodes. Some of them will come in through school nodes, some of them will come in through museums, some of them will come in through community libraries. My interest is a little bit broader than the MacArthur interest. I'm interested in lifelong learning, the learning cycle. I'm especially interested because I don't really have an expertise on youth. Probably the only kind of demographic group I can claim any kind of curriculum work with is my undergraduates that I worked with at USC. But my interest is in really kind of bridging the generations, the generational kind of interests, and bringing kind of people of multiple generations into these learning environments so that they become not only lifelong learners, but of course lifelong teachers. It connects with a long-standing kind of feminist project that I've had to bring girls and women into the project of technology development. That's something that I've been working on since I was, even before I was at Georgia Tech. But what I realized is that this kind of commitment to build these distributed learning networks and to start thinking about the protocols and the practices is that really what I'm asking and what we're looking for and what we're demanding are new commitments from people, including new commitments from myself. That one of the things that I think sabotages interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary efforts is that people come in and they're too eager to divvy out the work in a kind of facile division of labor where the artists do the art, the humanists do the critical work, and the engineers do the technology. And I think that it is exactly that kind of division of labor, that institutionalized division of labor that needs to be kind of overthrown or kind of resisted. And what that means, as somebody who was not trained kind of formally as a technologist, that means you have to, like kind of a humanist that I am, you have to be willing to kind of learn to be stupid again and learn how to do things and program and understand the language and understand the vocabulary and the vernaculars and so on, and get your hands dirty and start at the ground up if it's learning how to, nuts and bolts and power tools and soldering and so on. So it requires new commitments on the part of people who are rather seasoned. I think it goes without saying that I think the paradigm shift happens through this creative work of collaborative teams. And as I was talking with Anne last night, I am absolutely convinced that in terms of the university setting, that this paradigm shift is not going to happen unless we rethink our physical spaces. We have outgrown it, and we know that physical space is the hardest thing in a university to fight for. I have a group of 6 colleagues and we rented a space contiguous to USC to build our co-design lab. That then only after we kept spending our time there that the university agreed to pick it up. I mean, it was just kind of guerrilla tactics to get them to realize we needed a different kind of space to do our collaborative work. Much more spaces that look much more like design spaces, classroom spaces that look much more like architectural studio spaces. And I'm talking about humanities. I'm not talking about things that are actually building architectural models or so on. I'm talking about teaching humanities in these messy spaces. So in closing, for me, what's next is I'm working on kind of new research and new prototypes that are kind of XFR Take 2, there's the concept of the genre of object that we're developing, are these things, we're calling them evocative knowledge objects. These are mixed reality objects or mixed media objects. They're physical objects that are digitally augmented, that are meant to kind of invoke learning through the interaction between the object and the co-creation of knowledge through the object and the user. I'm grounding this in a kind of an argument about the 21st century literacies, expanding the notions of reading and writing to understand what other kind of critical literacies are required in the 21st century. We're looking at placing these objects or situating these objects in mixed reality learning environments. Again, my interest is specifically community libraries and museums, and to date I've pretty much only focused on science technology museums, not so much on art museums. Again, my interest is in kind of tinkering the thinking with objects and how we go back, perhaps in a way that I think art museums have had a kind of a long and successful kind of history, but how do we go back to remember that the ways of the hand are kind of our knowledge-making ways, that we make knowledge with our hands as well as with our heads, and we make knowledge in working with the materials of the world as well as with digital kind of materials. So thank you.